On a dark night at San Francisco International Airport, 4 planes filled with passengers were waiting for their turn to take off. Suddenly, they noticed another aircraft approaching rapidly for landing. The pilot of the incoming aircraft requested landing clearance from Air Traffic Control, ATC, and ATC granted permission. Initially, the pilots of the 4 planes on the ground thought it might be a misunderstanding. They expected the approaching aircraft to align itself with the empty runway as it got closer. However, what they assumed was entirely wrong. The incoming plane was heading straight toward the 4 stationary planes. Welcome back to Wonder Hitch videos, viewers. This terrifying incident is not very old. It occurred on July 7, 2017. On that day, Air Canada flight ACA 759 took off from Toronto Pearson International Airport with 135 passengers and 5 crew members on board. It was a routine flight, scheduled to land at San Francisco International Airport in 5 hours and 30 minutes. The pilots were highly experienced and had landed at San Francisco Airport numerous times before. However, this day was anything but ordinary for them. This incident would later become a significant example in the aviation industry. Everything went smoothly during the flight, but as Air Canada 759 approached San Francisco, the pilots began preparing for landing and waited for ATC clearance. It's worth noting that San Francisco Airport has 4 runways, but only 2 can be operational at any given time. If the wind is coming from the south, specific runways are used for landing and takeoff. If the wind is from the west, the other 2 runways are utilized. These procedural details are crucial in aviation. However, the events of this day not only surprised the pilots but also shocked the entire aviation system. We all know that airplanes are always made to take off or land against the wind. That day, the wind was coming from the west, which meant one of the designated runways, 28L or 28R, 28 left and 28 right, had to be used for landing against the wind. Everything seemed normal so far, but then things started to go wrong. Runway 28L was closed for maintenance and its lights were turned off. Air Traffic Control, ATC, granted Air Canada 759 permission to land on the adjacent runway 28R. Since the pilots had landed at this airport many times before, they expected to see the 2 parallel lights of the runway, and they knew they needed to land on the right side runway. But this is where they made their first mistake. There are 2 taxiways on either side of these runways marked with green lights. These taxiways are used by aircraft to reach the runway after loading passengers from the terminal. Due to the darkness of the night, the pilots of Air Canada 759 mistook the green taxiway lights for 28R, and the actual lights of 28R were mistaken for 28L. However, the bigger danger was still unknown to the pilots. Yes, the right side taxiway had 4 fully loaded aircraft waiting for their turn to take off. 3 of these planes belonged to United Airlines and 1 to Philippine Airlines. Together, they carried over 1,000 passengers and their fuel tanks were fully loaded. The distance between runway 28R and the taxiway was only 100 meters. When Air Canada 759 aligned itself with the taxiway, it was difficult for ATC to visually determine from a distance where the plane was actually heading. Now, the biggest question arises: why weren't the pilots of Air Canada 759 informed about the closure of runway 28L? The closure of runways for maintenance is a common occurrence, and had the pilots known about it, this confusion might never have arisen. The information about the closure of runway 28L was included in the NOTAMs, Notices to Air Missions. NOTAMs are notices that provide all necessary details for a flight, from takeoff to landing. However, the reality is that finding and understanding critical information in NOTAMs is not always easy. This is why the notice about the closure of 28L was overlooked by the pilots, marking their second major mistake. Air Canada 759 was rapidly approaching the runway, which in reality was the taxiway, preparing to land, creating the risk of a major disaster. The Air Traffic Control Tower had granted Air Canada 759 permission to land using a visual approach. A visual approach means the pilots have to visually locate the runway and manually align the aircraft with it. Typically, a visual approach is permitted when the weather is clear, but in the past, several accidents have occurred where pilots failed to judge the approach accurately and ended up landing in the wrong place. For this reason, most pilots rely on the instrument guidance system even during a visual approach. This instrument guidance system constantly informs the pilot whether they are aligned with the correct runway or not. To activate this system, the runway number must be entered manually. While modern aircraft usually activate the guidance system automatically, the Airbus A320 required the system to be activated manually, a step the pilots missed for some reason. This was their third major mistake. But the question arises, why were the pilots making one mistake after another? The truth is, it had been an extremely long day for both pilots. At this point, it was 11:05 p.m., and neither of them had gotten any substantial rest in the past 19 hours. These were Canadian pilots, and at that time, Canada's fatigue regulations for pilots were not as strict as those in the United States. We've already discussed the 3 major mistakes made by the Air Canada 759 pilots, but what about the 4 planes on the ground? They could see that Air Canada 759 was heading towards the taxiway instead of the runway, so why didn't they alert the control tower? The reason lies in standard procedures at San Francisco Airport. Everyone was aware that during a visual approach at this airport, planes often approach slightly further to the right than usual. This is because aligning perfectly with runway 28R on the initial approach would require planes to fly over the densely populated areas of San Francisco, creating noise pollution issues. To avoid this, pilots usually make final adjustments and align with the runway closer to landing. For the pilots of those 4 planes, this was normal behavior, so they didn't think to report it to the control tower. However, as the Air Canada plane got closer and still didn't align with 28R, the Philippine Airlines aircraft took precautionary action by switching on its landing lights, hoping to signal the approaching plane that there were already 4 planes lined up on the taxiway. Meanwhile, the pilots of Air Canada 759, still mistaking the taxiway for runway 28R, noticed some lights ahead. Both pilots felt that something was off, so they immediately sent a radio message to the control tower. The control tower replied, "There's no one on 28R, and the runway is completely clear. You have permission to land." However, in reality, the control tower was unaware that the Air Canada aircraft was not heading for 28R, but was about to land on the taxiway instead. Normally, in such situations, there is an additional controller present to monitor ground traffic. However, since this was during the late night hours when airport traffic is minimal, only one controller was managing everything. Fortunately, the pilots of the waiting planes overheard the conversation between Air Canada and the control tower. They too were puzzled as to why the Air Canada aircraft wasn't aligning with the runway even as it got closer. Now, with only a few seconds left, the waiting pilots could see disaster looming before their eyes. It became evident that the Air Canada plane was mistaking the taxiway for the runway and was about to land. The pilot of the frontmost United 1 plane acted quickly and, without identifying their call sign, immediately warned the control tower. The control tower swiftly sent Air Canada the command to go around, abort landing, and climb again. At that moment, the Air Canada plane was only a few feet above the 3rd plane in the queue. Thankfully, the Air Canada pilots reacted immediately, pulling the levers to climb back into the air and regain altitude. Had there been even a 1-second delay, this could have been recorded as one of the deadliest accidents in aviation history. The taxiway had nearly 1,000 passengers on the parked planes, while the Air Canada aircraft had 135 passengers and crew. All these aircraft were fully fueled, and if the accident had occurred, it would have been extremely difficult to control. After the incident, a thorough investigation was conducted, which revealed that the pilots of Air Canada 759 were at fault. They neither activated the instrument guidance system nor read the instructions listed in the notices to airmen, no TAMs. Additionally, the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, established new rules for San Francisco Airport, under which visual approaches would not be allowed if a runway was closed. Moreover, it was made mandatory to have a ground traffic controller along with air traffic control even during off-peak hours. I hope you liked this video from Wonder Hitch. For more videos, please like and share our channel, and don't forget to leave your valuable comments. We will meet in the next amazing video.